The title of this session is I'm going to talk about the new lead pastor job description. And in a moment, I'm going to show you what my job description literally is. And it was the pre-COVID job description. And then I'm going to kind of talk through a little bit of how these have shifted and changed a little bit. This is for me. I'm definitely not trying to make you do what I do or any of that. I just want to give it to you as some food for thought. I do want to introduce, though, a tension, Tension, that I think we all need to wrestle with, okay? The first is the tension of the fact that we don't want to be that group of people that Jesus showed up in Matthew 21 and Mark 11, who were the money changers in the temple, who got the beat down, right? There is a certain allergic reaction that I think good-hearted men and women of God, ministers have when things become mercenary. If you have that allergic reaction, praise the Lord. Please don't ever lose that. I think there should be something, your spidey senses. You know, have you ever come into an environment and you're going, something feels a little bit off. I think we do well to embrace that and don't ever lose that, okay? So Jesus, it says they were money changers and they were selling doves and they were doing all these things. And so there's that. And I think it'd be easy to right there sort of make it a black and white issue and go, we're just not going to be that. But you have to sort of, within that, you have to actually consider the fact that Jesus made up a parable, okay? He makes up a parable in the book of Luke, okay? A fictional story that Jesus makes up in Luke chapter 16. Okay, so if you have your Bible, Luke 16, 8 through 12, while you're thinking about the money changers and how you don't want to be shady and you don't want to be mercenary, Jesus says in Luke 16 is the parable of the shrewd manager, where he invents this character that's about as shady as they get. He's actually like a nightmare of an employee. He gets fired for being a bad manager, and then on his way out, he gives 50% off discounts to everybody. He's already been fired, but so he still has the codes and he still has access, They didn't walk him out and take his keys right away. So he goes and he gives 50% discounts to everybody to curry favors so that when he was unemployed, everybody owed him one and he landed on his feet. And when I read that, I'm like, what a scumbag. And Jesus, okay, Jesus, who makes this story up, says, he basically says, yeah, the guy is a scumbag, but he says in verse 8, it is true that the children of the world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Verse 9, this is a bit uncomfortable. He says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you into an eternal home. And by the way, that becomes the backdrop. That kind of weird parable of Jesus, where he in some way sort of applauds the shrewdness of this guy, that's the backdrop for this one that we've all preached. If you're faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in larger ones. But if you're dishonest in little things, you'll be dishonest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy with worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? See, most of us preach that, but we didn't preach what was right before it. It says, and if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? What is the tension? The tension is we don't want to be shady, but we do want to be shrewd. So if we're not careful, what we do is anything that appears to be business-oriented, anything that appears to look like it could be mercenary, we repel it, or we go to the other end of the spectrum and we fully embrace it, and there's an erosion of our hearts. I want to invite you to do what is probably the healthy thing to do, which is to embrace that tension, to wade into it, and in a case-by-case basis, offer it to the Lord and say, God, in this situation, maybe you do want us to do some business-type things, but to not sell out. I can't tell you what you're supposed to do right now other than to wrestle in that tension case by case, season by season, and don't make it a black and white issue. Enter into the gray. I'm going to give you the lead pastor job description because the reason I even say that to set it up is because there are some things I'm going to say that could be perceived as we're sucking the Holy Spirit out of the church and we're just turning it into a business. It's not, but it is in that tension. One of the most important things that you're going to do as a pastor, is if you're the lead pastor of a church or leader of an organization, is aiming yourself. That's big. You're a big part of the team, and you don't even know what your team needs to look like until you know who you are and what you're good at and how you serve the organization best. So here's, I'm gonna give you the 5. And by the way, this is my real top 5 job duties. Our board does an annual evaluation of me in these top 5, in these 5 areas. They give me a score and give me feedback on these, but these are the 5 things, and this is pre-COVID, all right? Top 5. Number 1, casting a compelling vision. If it's confusing where we're going, what we're doing, what we're about, what the vision of the church is, that is my fault. And so that's number 1. Number 2 is preaching effective sermons. They don't have to be fire sermons. I don't need to yell and scream. I can if I want, but I don't have to. They need to be effective, though. If people don't understand them, if they're not clear, if they don't know what to do with it, they don't know how to contextualize it, if they don't know how to apply it, it's not very effective. If it's overly complex and everybody walks out confused, that's not very effective. So preaching effective sermons. Number 3, creating a healthy culture. Creating a healthy culture. Systems are how it moves, culture is how it feels. How does it feel? How does it feel in this organization? So part of that is even defining the culture, okay? Have you gone through the process of actually putting language on your culture? By the way, you won't be able to fix a cultural issue if you haven't defined it, because a problem that's undefined is undefeated. It's like putting a mask on and trying to swing and hit something. You can't see anything, you haven't defined it. Definition brings clarity. So how would you articulate your culture? I can't hold you accountable to something we haven't defined. We can talk more about that later if it's something you want to talk about, but ultimately that falls on me. Number 4 is to oversee staff and systems. Now, I'll be straight up with you. This is not my strength personally. Like, back to self-awareness, systems and staff. I know enough about systems to be dangerous. I'm really good on a whiteboard, by the way. I can kill systems on a whiteboard, okay? I have dealt with the guilt and shame of whiteboarding something about a system and going home and going, we don't do any of that. We don't do any of that, all right? But this is what we whiteboard. Okay, so within that, it's still under my oversight, which means it's my job to make sure we get the right people in place and that I give them enough clarity and enough support to help them to execute that. So if it ain't happening, ultimately it comes back on me. Number 5 is to effectively generating and strategically distributing resources. Okay, so if we got money problems, I need to own that. And then I'm also accountable for what's going out and how it's going out. Is it going to the right places? Okay, are we spending our money the very best we can, okay, to execute on the vision that we believe God has given to this church? And part of what we say to our team is, don't spend $1 you wouldn't be willing to take this microphone and stand up in front of the church on a Sunday morning and explain. So that falls under my responsibility, okay? So those are my top 5 pre-COVID, and those are still my top 5, but I'm gonna kind of talk through them now and how some of my and our thinking is shifting, and maybe this will be food for thought for you. Let's go to the first one. The first one is casting a compelling vision. Here's what we've done really over the last year and a half is what I want to add to that is to look again. Okay, so vision is you look and you see what is vision? You see something done. I can see it done. You have an idea. If you're a visionary in the room, you can just see stuff done. You walk into a house that looks horrible and you can see it remodeled in your mind. I know what it looks like with that wall moved. You don't need them to bring you a virtual image. You can see it done. You can see the idea finished. So as a visionary, you saw something done pre-COVID. I want to encourage you to look again and to challenge every assumption. I've added this little sort of bullet point to my job description here is that I am the chief assumption challenger. Challenge every assumption. I had a handout that we didn't get, and I put on there, and I'll go ahead and put it online or whatever on social. I'll get it out, or I'll CMN. Maybe you guys can email it to everybody or however you want to do it. But 20 assumptions. I wrote down 20 assumptions that we've challenged in the last year and a half. And some of these, by the way, took a lot of discipline I would say humility to even be willing to do it, because these are things I stood flat-footed on the stage in front of our church and was a proponent for and declared in front of everybody. And yet, if I am not willing to challenge that assumption, I'm allowing my personal pride, my personal ego, the fact that I said we were going to do this, and unwillingness to come back and challenge that could actually become a huge obstacle to what God wants to do next, because I'm still operating under an old assumption. Don't be afraid to challenge the assumption. You put it out there, wrestle with it, and you may turn it over 20 times and go right back to what you believed at the beginning. Cool, we've had the discipline to wrestle with it. But if it's an important component of your vision, put it all back on the table. Put it all back on the table. I think leaders and pastors sometimes are afraid of losing face because I'm bringing something that I used to argue for. I have found, it seems like the sharpest sharp people that I know actually gain respect for leaders that are willing to challenge assumptions, that are willing to ask hard questions and to revisit things that they used to be a proponent of. I'll tell you, part of our journey is we launched out multi-site vision, started one location, bought a second building, second location, got opened a door. And in my mind, I love the multi-site model. Made a lot of sense. You go, man, this makes dollars and cents, right? It makes total sense. You're able to do it at a fraction of the cost operationally. At some point, you're able to turn chairs over more often. You're able to operate a larger church with lower operational costs, less overhead, to be able to put them in neighborhoods. Okay, some people will drive 30 minutes, most won't. So you're doing the same thing that Walgreens does and the supermarket does. So all of that made sense. Of course, geniuses like Craig Rochelle and Chris Hodges and all these people do it well. So I'm just going, well, why would I reinvent the wheel? Works. Let's do it. So we entered that game. Of course, we raise tons of money to do so, millions of dollars. I stand up and talking vision, and COVID hits. We found ourselves in an interesting position because just like all of you, everybody went online. Fortunately, we had an online infrastructure. We start picking up and getting these stories coming in like crazy, and we're still getting them. I mean, last Sunday, they came in and told me in between services, we had people online from Ukraine. They were letting us know, we're in Ukraine right now, we're watching. And so, I mean, these type of opportunities that for all of us opened up during COVID, we then have two campuses. Our second location was doing good. It wasn't thriving. It wasn't going gangbusters, but it was doing well. The measurables were good, but it was one of those things that when we really took an honest look and challenged every assumption, we had to look at ourselves, self-awareness, and go, are we really good at systems? Because what happens, you launch something, think of it like a child. When you launch a child at first, it's a very inefficient little person. And they take a lot of money and a lot of, a lot of energy, okay, high maintenance, all of this. But over time, if you do it right, they eventually start brushing their own teeth. They eventually start, okay, and then this low maintenance, and then you ain't got to worry about it. It's kind of the similar thing. And we were finding over time, our child wasn't getting good at brushing its own teeth. And some of it may have been our parenting. And so we started to look at self-awareness. What are we good at? What is just happening for us? Okay, what's happening that we're not even really focused on? Then we're looking at our team and going, how much, like there are some things that you can't necessarily quantify, like the energy of our team and the focus of our team and the ideas that we have, that because we can't pull them off in both locations, hit the cutting room floor, that really we think would have been. So you got to kind of calculate and you go, okay, we know how many staff members we have dedicated there, but these 4 staff members actually probably spend about somewhere between 10 and 15 hours a week working on this stuff. And so you're just starting to deal with and trying to quantify and calculate and feel the fact that we don't feel very aligned on this. It's not producing the return. It costs this much money. And so we wrestled our way through it to where we came, and we sold the building to another church and shut the campus down. Now, I got to tell you, from a lead pastor standpoint, from a visionary standpoint, from a guy who asked people to dig deep and give, to a guy who gave myself to it, it was hard to do, but we went through a 9-month journey of really walking through self-awareness and being willing to actually anticipate something that, to be straight up honest, we could have financially afforded to continue to do it We could have. We could afford. We weren't bleeding out financially. We could have kept doing it, but we had to anticipate, and we did that by challenging the assumptions of our vision. Here's what I'm gonna tell you. If you wait until the decision is a no-brainer, you will be too late most of the time. I think that's what a lot of leaders do. I know that's what I'm tempted to do, is to wait till it's a no-brainer. But if you wait till it's a no-brainer, most of the time, it's too late. It's too late. And leaders cannot afford to be too late. So we have to develop the ability to anticipate, to make hard decisions earlier than maybe we feel comfortable doing it, and the courage to act when we get clear. All right? Number 2, I had preaching effective sermons, and I've kind of reframed that and broadened it out a little bit. And it's to create compelling content. Certainly, sermons fall under that. I'm just broadening it out. I'm not saying we shouldn't preach effective sermons. We should. But to think about the fact that social media, right, is not an app, it's a community. If we church planted 20 years ago, we would have go into the community and we would find the hubs. And we would go into the community center, rec center, and play some ball. We would show up at the farmer's market and make friends. And we would go to the parade and hand out bottles of water. Why? Because that's where the people are. Well, people are on social media. People are on the internet. People are on YouTube. People are in these communities. These are communities that people are in. And so when we think about preaching effective sermons, that's part of it, but also really developing content in a more broad way, and to take the skills. By the way, I personally have ridiculous optimism for the church right now. Obviously, some of that has to do with Jesus saying, I'll build my church, gates of hell will not prevail against it. That does give a bit of courage. But I will say, you do know all of these businesses right now that are on social are trying to find content. You know, they're trying to, how do we come up with compelling content? You've been doing it for 30 years. You've been doing it for 20 years. This is what you do, okay? You go, you walk around, you see sermon illustrations everywhere, okay? So you don't have to wait to put it in a sermon. You can make it a 15-second. You can make it a 1 minute. But to think about how do we make more compelling content, which let me just hone in here a little bit. There's a great book out there, some of you probably read it, heard of it, called The E-Myth. And then there's the E-Myth Revisited. What is the E-Myth? The E-Myth is the entrepreneurial myth. E stands for entrepreneurial. What is the E-Myth? The E-Myth is this. People start a business for a different reason than having a business. So for example, let's say you have Aunt Bessie, and Aunt Bessie has a secret family recipe for pies. And these pies it's a spiritual experience. You eat the pie, you're like, this is unbelievable. It's the best thing I've ever eaten. And of course you serve it and people are like, what's in it? You're like, can't tell you, family recipe. And they eat it and they're like, that was an existential experience I just had. And you're like, so what do they tell you? You got to start a business. You got to start a pie business. And of course you're a visionary. So you're like, yeah, here's a business. 7 billion people in the world. They all need to have Aunt Bessie's pie. And I will not rest until they've all tasted and they've tasted this experience. Well, here's the problem. Now you have a business. Why'd you do it? Because you love the pies and you love the way people's faces are. But now you got like distribution and like HR and like you need legal and you need all kinds of stuff. So he said people do it. They start a salon because they love doing hair, but now I got a salon. Some of us started a church because we love to preach the word, and yet now we got to. So how does it work? He said you got 3 components of the E-Myth. You got these 3 components. The first is you have the artist. And the artist is the one that makes sure that pie, this isn't Betty Crocker, all right? This is Aunt Bessie. It's different. This is our art. And so they're the one that protects the art, and they define the art, and they make sure that every time you show up, every pie from the 1st to the 7th billionth, they're the one that's protecting the art. The second is the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur is the visionary. They're the one that says, here's how we're going to do it. We're going all online. Or they're the one that goes, we're going to buy up corner shops, and we're going to go do that. They come up with the multi-site plan. They come up with the vision, and they're the ones that are driving that. And then the third is the manager that makes sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and we're turning the crank. As a leader, you have to know what is your forte. What is your forte? You have to ask yourself, what what meeting, and you might say, oh, I love preaching, I love, how it feels in the room and da-da-da-da, but just truly ask yourself, would you rather come out of a vision meeting, would you rather go in, have a vision meeting, come out of this meeting where we talk about how many locations we're gonna have, here's the next hill we're gonna take, or do you love just rolling around in James chapter 1? You come out of James chapter 1, you're like, these people better buckle their chin strap up tight Sunday, because I got a word, and I'm going to tilt the prism in a way they've never seen. Are you an artist? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a visionary? Or are you a manager? To dot the I's, cross the T's. I say that because when it comes to aiming yourself, I'm trying to aim me, you're trying to aim you, what is my greatest contribution? It's in there somewhere. You might say, I'm a good content person, but I'm not a great one. Well, then maybe you aim your time more on the entrepreneurial side, the vision side, the development side, but you raise up other people. You might need some team members that are better preachers than you, that are better communicators than you. And you fan that flame and not necessarily trying to be something that you're not. So it is like knowing who you are, but I think within this, we really have to start broadening out the content that we make, and start to look around at, one of the things we were talking about actually last night, we got with a couple of our team, was we were talking actually about how a lot of these conversational podcasts are really taking off. So you'll see like there was the monologue podcast where like the Craig Groeschel leadership podcast that he would do a lot, where it's like, okay, here's the 5 points, and it was all very succinct and organized and systematic and all of that. And it was just him looking at a camera or talking into a deal. And yet you see some of the biggest ones, some of the most effective, are actually 2 or 3 people having a conversation. So it doesn't mean you necessarily have to produce 3 or 4 more sermons that week, it could be you taking what you did, repackaging it, understanding consumer behavior around the different platforms, and creating conversations. All that to say, start to really think broader beyond just, I got to have a word on Sunday, into content creation as a whole. We can talk more about that if you want. Number 3 is the healthy culture. Here's what I want to give you on this, is I want to encourage you right now to sort of read the tea leaves of the day we live in. This is no secret. We had a global pandemic 2 years ago. And then there was a lot of things culturally that were really hard. It was really divisive. And then there's a war going on right now. So there's just like people are tired. People are exhausted emotionally. I can't remember if I talked about this last year or not, so forgive me if I'm being redundant. But we studied during COVID a concept called surge capacity. If you're familiar with this, but surge capacity is when you're in crisis, you get hyper-focused. If this building was on fire, we would all get really focused. We'd get in a straight line. We would organize ourselves, because it's just intensity of the immediacy of the threat makes you do that. But you can't live there. Eventually you get worn out. Even your body can't just keep living in that space. It's just fatigued. That's why some people don't even know. They're just so tired. They don't even know what to do. And so when you think about, we probably all are experiencing some of that 2+ years now into this, but on top of that, your teams, your people are there. And it actually, as I was thinking about the healthy culture piece, I think right now what we all need to be doing is nurturing our leaders and determining the right pace. I so appreciated what Rob Ketterling said earlier today when he said, fast is our favorite pace, or something like that. But then he talked about the wisdom of a leader to know when to pull back a bit. And if you are by nature, you're an Enneagram 8, you're a D on the disc, you are vision, drive type person, sometimes we call faith things, we name faith things that are actually personality traits. For some, it would take more faith for you to downshift. I want to actually take you real quick, and I love talking to preachers because we can speak shorthand. 1 Kings 12, you remember Rehoboam, he comes and he takes over, and he's like, what do we do? Because the people come to him and say, we're whooped. We're exhausted. We're tired. Relieve these burdens. They said in verse 4, 1 Kings 12:4 says, they said, lighten the harsh labor demands and heavy taxes that your father imposed on us, and then we will be your loyal subjects. In other words, you will have earned our trust when you didn't let your ego get in the way, when you had enough wisdom to know when to downshift. And then it says in verse 7, the older counselors affirmed this. They replied, if you're willing to be, look at this. Oh, this is so good. If you are willing to be a servant to these people today and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your loyal subjects. Well, then we all know he went to the young cats in verse 10, and this is what the young guy said. This is what you should tell those complainers. This is what you should tell those people who aren't aligned to the vision, who don't have enough guts to power through, who lack spine. This is what you tell all those spineless people. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make it even heavier. We're going to go 3 times as fast. My father beat you with whips. I'll beat you with scorpions. Then it said in verse 13, but Rehoboam spoke harshly to the people. It's my opinion. It's what I believe right now. I don't think it's time to speak harshly to people right now. I think there are some pastors right now that fancy themselves prophetic who are just angry and tired. And it can be a bit confusing when somebody gets up and they're saying stuff, but it's just, there's an angry undertone, which is from exhaustion. And so the presence of mind to know the difference, Rehoboam didn't, and he didn't understand timing. And so he spoke harshly to the people, it says. Now watch this, verse 16, it says, when all Israelite heard that the king refused to listen to them, they responded, down with the dynasty of David. What are they saying? They're saying, down with all the work that's been done generationally up to this point. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Why? Because the son of Jesse had no interest in us. Back to your homes, O Israel. Look out for your own house, O David. So the people of Israel returned home. I think it's important right now culturally on our teams, among our leaders, to know the difference between ambition and selfish ambition. Are you driving it too hard because you just don't want to look like you're failing on the back end of COVID, or because you're actually afraid, we're going to lose everything? Hey, God's not giving you a spirit of fear and of timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. And sometimes that self-discipline is to know when to nurture your team, when to actually access your pastor bag instead of your visionary field marshal bag. Number 4, oversee the staff and systems. Okay, what I have here is actually rethinking staff models and priorities. Rethink your staff models and priorities. Nothing may need to change for you. You may be ahead of the curve. You may be perfectly staffed for where you're going, but you may not. Revisit that. You talk to a lot of people, and I'm not going to take a ton of time on this now unless somebody asks a question or you want to talk about it, but I think you should be wrestling with, what did we previously need to pay someone full-time to do, and now what can happen through a contractor? You know, what do we not necessarily need a full-time person to do? I was talking to a pastor recently who, and this is them. I'm not saying you should do this, or I'm not even saying I'm going to do it, but this is what they do. He said, we used to hire a video person, but he said we've now trained our entire staff from administrative support to the outreach. Everybody knows how to edit video now. Everybody knows how to capture and edit video. It's become a basic skill that everyone has to have on our team. And again, that's a rethinking of what they're going to do. How much of your budget should go to digital? How much of it should go to next generation? How much of it should go to music? Again, I think you should just at least revisit it, challenge that assumption. I'll keep going. Number 5 is it was effectively generating and strategically distributing resources. And here's what I'm going to give you, and you're probably going to have to fight an allergic reaction to what I'm about to say. But I want to encourage you to really become a student of consumer behavior. When I say consumer, some of you start getting hives because we've all preached, and me included, about the consumer Christian. That's what's the problem with this generation, a bunch of consumer Christians. Consumers, we want producers. We're consumers. That's why we're all going to hell in a handbasket. Consumer. That's what's wrong. If I was to summarize what's wrong, it's a consumer Christian. Okay. If you don't know consumer behavior, you're in massive trouble. Because otherwise, all you'll do is just have a really good excuse as to why the church isn't growing, and a really good thing. You can condemn everybody, and here's what they won't do, and you can curse the darkness like crazy. But you should become a student of consumer behavior. Why become a student of consumer behavior? Because consumers are human beings, and we understand. I could really go on and on about this, but I'm gonna give you a few things. One, it's really interesting that Jesus, when he shows up to begin calling the disciples, the first disciples he called, what did they do for a living? They were fishermen. What did he do for them first? He gave them a boatload of fish. What did they really want at that point? Fish. And he gave it to them. Cast your nets on the other side. Their nets are ripping. And then he goes, once he's done that, he's like, let me show you how to fish for people. Which, by the way, take that into consideration. Jesus didn't say, hey, take all your business acumen and throw it in the trash. He's like, hey, you knew some stuff about fishing. I'm going to show you how to take that and apply it to this. By the way, think about this. You ever think about this? Jesus said, I will what my church? I will build my church. What was Jesus' profession? Carpenter. I don't know, kind of interesting. He could have used a different, I will build my church. He was using essentially some of his business knowledge, some of his skill in other things and applying it over here, even metaphorically, but there's a lot of kind of literal connections. So what I'm gonna say is, if you don't understand consumer behavior, you won't know how to sell. Oh, I just said another bad word, sell. Sell, what are you talking about, sell? Sell, you gotta know how to sell. I was guest speaking at a church recently, and they were doing baptisms at the church, and the pastor got up. This is what he did. That's what he did. Pastor gets up after worship. He said, what's up, everybody? Today we're going to be baptizing folks. He said, pull up that scripture. He pulls up Acts 22. He said, hey, let me tell you about Acts 22. It's the Apostle Paul. He's retelling the story of Ananias on the street called Straight. And he goes through, and Ananias says to him, hey, Paul, you're called of God, and you're this and this. And he said, now it's time for you to be baptized. He says, what are you waiting for? That's right in the text. What are you waiting for? And then this pastor looked at the church. He goes, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Call to action. Then you know what he did? Study sales. He battled objections. He goes, some of you, I'll tell you what you're waiting for. You're waiting for a change of clothes. We got you. Sit back here, we got all kinds of clothes. In fact, you can take them home with you. He goes, we got deodorant, we got da. He's telling everything. He went through objections. Some of you aren't here, or some of you are saying, I'm waiting for. What I'm waiting for is for all my friends and family to be here, but we have professional photographers today. We're gonna take pictures, and you can post it, and you go. So he went objection, that's battling objections. If you go take a class on sales, that's what he was doing. And you go, well, see, that's what's wrong with the church. The only problem is that's what Ananias did to Paul. All he did was run Ananias' playbook. You got to understand how to do this, how to sell. Let me give you another thing. This is something recently I was sharing with some of our leaders, okay? Go ahead and bring up that picture. You got the picture of the bottle. You have it? No, wrong one. Yes. I took a picture of this. I was walking through the supermarket. I'm walking down the aisle. This is what I see. What's the first thing you saw? What are they selling? It's melatonin, but what it doesn't say is melatonin. Let's just real quick. If you've got if you were to just, this is a total guess, but okay, what percentage of people in the supermarket are there to buy melatonin? We'll say 10%, maybe 2%. How many people in the supermarket are there to get good sleep or would like to buy good? If you're selling small groups, you're selling melatonin. And only the people that are there for melatonin are going to buy it. If you're selling good sleep, okay, so you have to, in your own mind, understand what do small groups deliver? And by the way, now we got to have hard conversations and challenge assumptions, because you go, well, what you're buying with small groups is community. My only question is that what they're getting? Because if you sell me this and I take it and I'm not any more tired than I was before I took it, It did not deliver, and I get bad sleep. You sold me a bill of goods. So now we have to go and actually understand, what do groups, what is serving at our church? What does it actually produce? What is, by the way, a lot of us are going, how do we get people back to the building? Why? What am I gonna get when I come to the building that I can't get online with my puppy dogs and my lattes and in my robe? Way more convenient. Didn't have to get my kid ready. Why should I come in person? If you don't know, then you don't know how to sell or to market or advertise. You got to figure out what you're doing. And you go, well, that's what's wrong with church. It's marketing. No, you got to know what to do. Ananias knew what to do. We got to know what to do, what we're actually presenting. And here's what I'm going to tell you. In this day where people are saturated with messaging, oh, they got more, oh, there's more emails coming through. There's more. People always come to me, oh, Pastor, you got to get on this new social media. You got to get on this Clubhouse. I'm like, bro, I need more social media. Like, I need a hole in the head, dude. Last thing I want to do is have another. People have so many messages coming their way. How do you cut through the melatonin noise? You got to tell me what I'm buying. So you're going to have to sell everything. If people aren't coming to your meeting, it's because you didn't sell it to them. You got to sell your meeting. No, man, it's messed up. We do these group leaders training. No one shows up. You didn't sell them. You got to sell them. Why would I go? For what? If all you're going to do is give me a content dump, send me an email, save my gas. I don't have to get a sitter. If I'm going to get a sitter and I'm going to make time to do it, you got to sell me as to why am I coming to this? So anything where people aren't coming, all they're telling you is they didn't buy. By the way, this goes to everything, okay? Missions. The church that my dad pastored when I was growing up, all you had to do was say missions, and people start throwing money at you. It does not work like that. I got to sell. People don't understand. They think, well, Pastor, you have so much influence. If you just say it, people will give. No, I can prove that's not true. I've tried to raise some money that didn't go well because we didn't sell the right way. You got to understand. So become a student of consumer behavior. It has shifted drastically in COVID. So that is a huge deal. Let's do an impromptu poll real quick. How many of you personally would say your online to attendance ratios of shopping at Target versus Amazon have shifted since COVID? You would say you are more online, you buy more things online than you do at the store, more visits online. You visit Amazon more times than you do Target or Walmart or wherever, all right? Massive. I was talking to a staff member the other day. I said, what's the ratio? One said 10 to 1. They visit Amazon or online shopping 10 times for every one time they go to the store. Another said 100 to 1. That is a huge shift. You think that doesn't affect church? It totally affects church, massively. And we can be mad about it and curse the darkness, or we can adapt. And that's what we do. We adapt. We're adaptable. All right? Let me press pause there for a moment. And we have microphones up here for Q&A. And so we can do questions if anybody has questions. If not, we'll dismiss early. My preaching professor in college said pastors are afraid to dismiss early. And he said, if you will dismiss early, they will carry you out on their shoulders and name their family life center after you. That's what he told me. So if we dismiss early, we do, okay? And if anybody have any questions, anything I can speak to, do our best here.
Hey, Greg, check.
I think we need a mic over here.
Check. Yep.
Greg, thanks, great content. Where would you suggest that we could study some consumer culture? Like, what are some places that you're watching to learn how to know how to sell in the current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's because some of it is universal in terms of the whole world, had to go digital for a long time. So there are some, I think, global trends. But I think even like talking to your own folks, it's kind of difficult right now because like consumer behavior, even if you give a survey, it is confusing. The data analytics are confusing. So let me give you a quick example. I was exercising at a fitness club the other day. I'm walking out. I come off this, I'm sweaty. Everyone's in there. No one's wearing a mask. Droplets visible. I mean, you're just like droplets all over the place. I go walking out. This lady's like, Pastor Ford. I'm like, she comes running over. Oh my God. My name's this and that. And she's telling me her name. And she's like, and I've been coming to church a couple years and all this. And then when COVID hit, we shut down. I just want to say thank you. You kept me alive. And blah, blah, blah. Oh, so great. And she's like, but I haven't been back. I haven't been back. And I'm like, oh, really? She's like, yeah. She's like, I just, with all the singing in the room, the singing is just, and I'm sweating on this lady right now. I'm sweating on her. People are spitting on her. She's touching stuff. No one's cleaned anything. It's just a filthy place. And she's like, yeah, and I've been to J. Alexander's, and I've been go to Target all the time, and I've been everywhere. But, church, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just not ready yet. I'm just not ready yet. And so I'm sitting there. I'm like, if I give this woman a consumer survey, she doesn't know. She doesn't know. So in a sense, it is one of those things probably more than ever. We have to try to read minds a bit. And you're looking a little bit, I think you probably the best thing, and we do this quite a bit, is we go, what is the closest comparison to a church that's in the world? That's kind of tough. Because you can go, well, the ball game. But they have shorter seasons. So the Buckeyes are where I'm at, 7 home games. We do 52 weeks a year. We're gathering people. It's not exactly the same kind of so I think you're looking at how comfortable people are with digital. Even things like movie theaters. And so watching it, and then just asking your people, doing a lot of listening, and then I'll say a big one is watching yourself and your family and watching generations. Here's one: my daughter has a best friend. They hang out all the time. Whenever they're not together, they're texting. She's 13. Texting, she's always talking about her friend. I said, hey, have her over. We go, they're in church. They're sitting next to each other in a side room on their phones. And I come over as a good dad would, and I rebuke them. All right, I'm like, what are you guys doing? I was like, you guys are on your phones. Every time you're not together, you're always on with each other. And now you're together and you're ignoring one another and texting others. And they said, we're texting each other. They were texting one another, sitting shoulder to shoulder, texting one another. Challenge the assumption. People go, well, you can only have such a deep relationship digitally. Some of my closest friends, probably 90% of our conversations are text. And it's not just what up. I've poured my heart out via text. I've sent back some deep stuff, So I think you got to kind of watch it. Yeah, my wife and I were having dinner the other day. I'm like, hey, who are your 3 best friends? And she shares her 3 best friends, 2 of them whom she's only been in person with, I think 5 or 6 times in her life. And they've shared their hearts, most of it digital. So you got to just kind of watch your own behaviors and all of this.
We haven't quite consolidated or closed the location that we've considered. And I'm interested in what the process was in closing it. Did you move people over? What did you lose financially? How did you take that hit?
Yeah, so he's talking about closing down the campus. We took that really, really seriously. So what I did was I put together what I call a special project team. And these were people that could go in and basically go, hey, they're going to do they did an analysis around why it wasn't growing the way that we wanted it to. So it was growing, it was doing okay, but it wasn't thriving. So they went through and it's like, hey, is it a leadership issue? Is it a systems issue? Is it because it's a digital and whatever? Is it a location issue? Is it again, the leaders or the experience? You come in, the experience isn't as good or whatever it is. So they took a couple of months, they went to the services multiple times, came in and they met several times and created a report that basically showed that. The second was we looked at the numbers. So you do, obviously doing the math on how much is this costing. And I think, one of the things right now, and I'll say this is one of the assumptions we've challenged, is people will go, well, the digital attender doesn't give as much. And that probably is true right now, but I don't make the assumption that from a financial standpoint, and again, please hear my heart, I'm not trying to be a mercenary, but it's an assumption to think that people who are watching online can't or won't give financially. Question is, how should we approach them, right? So if I'm trying to take up an offering for someone who attends our church from Canada, and I'm like, guys, we're building a lobby, they're probably not gonna give to that. But what's a project or what's something that would appeal to them specifically that would affect their family well? And I'll say this, we received a 5-figure check, I mentioned Canada, from Canada. We're like, we're in Columbus, Ohio. I'm like, who is this? And they're like, don't you love those calls from the finance team? Hey, do you know this person? Nope, never met him, but I'm about to give him a phone call and say thank you. Which, by the way, let me say this. Some pastors, I think it's virtuous to have no idea where the money's coming from. I personally disagree big time. We had a woman one time, a few years ago, donated a bunch of stock. And it was the first person we'd had donate stock. We're like, what do we do with this? And so I called her to ask her what her intentions were. And in the course of the conversation, I thanked her up and down. It was really generous of you to do. This woman is in her 80s. She said, I've been giving in church all my life and no pastor's ever said thank you to me personally. So that felt really nice. And I was like, oh, what's wrong with these pastors? And then I went, I've never done it. So now, get a certain gift, whatever. I just get on the phone. I call them. I email them. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Because I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to look you in the eye and tell you thank you. And then I just say thank you. And then I say, how would you like for us to communicate in the future? Do you want us to leave you alone? Would you like to know information in advance? Would you like to know how much things cost? And you tell me how you'd like to be communicated with. And then they do. And then oftentimes there's more where that came from. So is that bad? No, I'm not twisting anyone's arm. I'm not manipulating. I'm just giving them the information because ignorant people can't buy. If I don't know about it, I'm not going to buy it. I can't pay for it. Some of them, by the way, this was one of the things during COVID. Sorry, I'm talking fast. But during COVID, I had to sit down and go, we are a service provider, essentially. Don't freak out on me. We're a service provider. We don't sell products. We provide services. I had to define what are the services we provide and how do we do it online. And what I came to the conclusion is one of the services we provide is giving people compelling things to give to. We tend to think that them giving to our church is them doing us a favor. But if you've ever had a great thing for people to give to, it's like, I don't know how to say it, like God loves a cheerful giver because you get cheerful about it. You're like, oh, I get to do that. Have you ever had somebody come up and go, thank you for letting me? So part of our job is to find those things, bring them. If people aren't giving, all they're telling us is what you're offering me is not compelling. I'm not compelled. So all that to say, to communicate with people to go, this is what we're doing and to let them do it. I think being intentional around that system is really important, yeah.
Okay, good segue into my question regarding finances. On your number 5, pre-COVID, you said effectively generate and strategically distribute resources. So we own a company. I've been a pastor for 2 years. My business sense says create more avenues to create more income for our family. But in church, it's primarily given through tithes and offering. Personally, that kind of scares me because people's, in spite of how much I teach about the heart and what they're given to and selling these things, I've been in sales my whole life, so you hit a good nerve when you mention sales. But I don't want to be totally dependent upon someone's giving because of whatever. I mean, COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs. Marriage may break up. I'm just trying to think of ways outside the box to create more streams of income for the church.
I mean, I think you can do that. Some people do. I mean, they find out how to offset cost. So, I mean, there's a bunch of creative ideas where you go, hey, let's share some space with somebody else. Let's collaborate. Let's do this or that. But I think in general, I mean, none of us want to be held captive to 2 or 3 people who have all the money and provide our budget. And of course, this is how we feed our families and all of this. And you may come up against that. I think we do have to check our hearts. It's back to the beginning of what I said in terms of wading into that tension. I don't want to just be friends with someone because they have money, okay? And that used to be my big fear is I would ignore givers. I would ignore people with high giving capacity because I was afraid they would think I was being partial to them or I was being kind to them simply because they had money, and I probably had some fear myself. Go into that tension, like walk into it and go, to be honest with you, you probably have a lot in common with a lot of these people who are doing really well in their businesses. A lot of what you're dealing with and your stress points and theirs, you're gonna find a lot of times a kindred spirit among these people. And to be honest with you, a lot of them, like your ability to pastor them through certain things, there's probably very few people that can pastor them the way that you can. Now, I think you have to look yourself in the mirror and you got to pray through. And if you're manipulating someone, allow the Holy Spirit to show you that, and then repent of that and step away and don't do it and get yourself out of that. But I think to give into that impulse to go, I don't want to do it because they have money. A lot of these, what I've found is if we stay clear to the vision and we're true to who we are, a lot of times, a lot of these people are some of the most kind, generous, humble people I've ever met. I'll throw this one thing out real quick. I have an uncle who is extremely wealthy and really successful in business and whatever, and I was going to meet with another person who was really wealthy. This was early in the church. I had a lunch appointment with this guy. So I called my uncle to basically get like a tutorial. I'm like, I don't want to look like an idiot. Like I'm gonna talk to this guy, like give me some advice. How do I talk to people like you? And what he said was, he's like, Greg, be totally yourself. He's like, you don't want someone who gives you $100,000 and $1 million worth of headaches. So he goes, I've been with the wealthiest people in the world. He's like, some of them are some of the most humble, down-to-earth people you've ever met in your life, and some of them are total jerks. He's like, and you either trust God or you don't. That if that jerk walks out the door, that God's gonna send, there's a humble, God-fearing person with just as much money that's in your community, and if you stay true, and you stay true to God, and you keep your heart soft, and you keep your skin thick, and you keep walking through, God's gonna bring the right people. So I think you gotta kind of walk through that, and I think it's being clear about what we're doing, and then letting people make up their own minds and not twisting their arms. Hey, thank you guys, I love you.
Give it up for